Good evening all and welcome. I have something a bit different for you today. 5 true stories with near misses from serial killers. All these people are lucky to be alive, and you'll find out why. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It's difficult to tell someone that they smell bad. This isn't new, it isn't something that no one has encountered. Most people will have come across this specific social issue at some point. No one wants to be the one that has to have the awkward conversation with the offending party. But more than that, no one wants to be the one that stinks and realizes that everyone else knew and no one else could come up to them and just tell them. This is hard enough with your friends, your co-workers, or your family, but doubly hard if it's someone in a position of authority. And it's made infinitely worse when they happen to be a nice person to boot. These were the thoughts I had many years ago as I sat in the detention hall looking around 4 blank walls at the other students that had committed some sort of imagined offense against their teachers that day. The sun always seemed to shine its brightest and its warmest on these days, where I needed to ham back and pay my penance for misbehaving. If I'm being honest, I probably still can't remember to this day what exactly I'd done wrong, except that now, looking back, I can probably admit I was at fault. When I was young, it was all everyone else's fault, but truly, I was difficult for no reason. Disruptive, argumentative, loud, the list goes on. So I was sitting there, watching the dust float through the sunbeams as they taunted me from outside, and I can still smell this sort of funk, something a bit stale, a bit off, nothing horrendous, just that little whiff that lets you know there's something somewhere nearby that could do with a bit of a clean. Pacing the row of surly students was our warden for the day, Mr. Francois, the wrestling coach. I've definitely had worse overseers for these long hours. If nothing else, he's friendly, always willing to chat and always trying to help. It never seemed to get him anywhere, but he'd at least try to speak with some of his frequent flyers in detention and get them to sort themselves out a bit. I almost respected him for it. There were some that didn't like him, not hard to see why really. Someone that big and strong, he would be considered intimidating to a lot of people, and most of the girls felt he was a bit creepy sometimes. The main complaint that everyone seemed to share was his smell. It didn't seem to matter the time of day or the weather outside. There was always that lingering odor. As kids do, there had been a few nicknames assigned to him, the sort of petty and obvious things that you could imagine school-aged children come up with. For my part, I never got any overly sinister vibes from him. He seemed like a guy doing his job and trying his best to do a little to help out the kids when he could. To this day, my enduring memory of him will be watching and smelling him walking between the desks in that godforsaken hall, while every atom of my brain tried to imagine myself elsewhere. But this isn't how other people remember him. Have you ever made a judgment on someone, and it turns out you're wrong about them? Of course you have, everyone has. But I can guarantee that even the most harsh assessment of Mr. Francois would have been close to the truth. Some of the kids said that he smelt because he lived in a filthy house with his parents, that it had hoarder-level stacks of rubbish sitting around everywhere, that it was the fact that he existed in this state that made him smell the way he did. It crept into every item of clothing that he ever owned, and there was no amount of showering or cologne that would ever cover up the stench. And this part ended up being true. The house he lived in was filled with levels of trash and rotten food that would even make a maggot gag. But that would end up being no way near the worst thing that was found in the house. It can't have been long after, when the whole school was abuzz with some scandalous news, that he'd been arrested. The usual suggestions were thrown around: caught drink driving, street fights. Some of the more unkind suggested that he had been taken in on crimes against hygiene, but possibly for the first time in recorded history, the rumors floating around the school would fall far short of reality. Details of crimes that were too horrific to be spoken about out loud. Descriptions of women that had gone missing. One had been found stashed away inside the house where he stayed, their remains wedged up in the attic space among the debris and the rubbish. Every single person that had ever interacted with him reviewed these discussions they had through a new lens, and adults and children alike shivered at the thought of such a monster walking around us. It took a few more years for me to fully understand exactly what he'd done. By this time I'd graduated school and was trying to make my way in the world. I happened to look it up. He was serving 8 life sentences, and against my better judgment I read up and got the full details of his crimes and the convictions. Vicious attacks, brutal even, almost all against women, ones that were a fair bit smaller than him, women who ended up losing their lives at his hands. All of them suffered the final indignity of all, to have their remains stashed haphazardly among endless piles of waste. I'm not sure if there's a life lesson in there somewhere. There have been many times over the years that I've thought back to those long, boring hours in detention and tried to figure out if there was anything I could have noticed or picked up on. Maybe the lesson is that evil isn't always obvious. Maybe evil can chat with you and offer you words of guidance. Maybe the truly terrible among us can slot into our lives so easily that we never even notice them being there. There were plenty of my classmates that started chirping up after the news broke, giving it large about how they always knew there was something wrong with him, that they were barely surprised. The truth is that most of us were, and that we should be. No one is expecting someone with multiple bodies in their house to be interacting with school kids on a day-to-day basis. Most of us were horrified to learn that the true source of that smell that seemed to cling to every inch of him was that of rotting corpses. We tried not to think too hard or too long about what most likely caused it, to not imagine how many particles of those rotting bodies we inhaled as we passed or spoke to him. The truth is now, even decades later, I reckon I could pick that smell out in an instant if I ever smelt it again. And I'll tell you this for nothing. If I ever do pick up on it, I'll be sure to give that person a wide berth, and maybe forwarding the police a tip. There isn't any mistaking the grisly stench of death. Not that any of us have had to smell it before. Somewhere in my mind I'm back in that hall. The dust dances in the sunbeam as the second hand on the clock ticks around at a brutally agonizing pace. I can't remember the faces of the people that were stuck there with me. I can't recall what day it was, what week it was, even probably what season it was. But I can smell it clear as day, and even in the sunshine, I shiver to recall. I used to work at a truck stop. Give me strength. I swore every passing hour was longer than the last. Don't get me wrong, truck drivers that pull into this stop are generally salt of the earth kind of guys. Good, solid men who want nothing more than a hot coffee, warm conversation, and a bit of time to take it easy. A welcome break from the monotonous miles and solitude of the cab. But for every 10 of these, you get that one that just wants to make you lie down in front of the nearest Kenworth and wait for it to start rolling. If you cured cancer, these guys would be on your case for not curing heart disease. You know the sort. The black coffee isn't black enough, the hot food not hot enough. No doubt the sky's too blue for them and the grass too green. It's as though they thrive on complaining, as if every word that passes their chicken lips is a physical form of agony to them. When I'm bringing the boys food and drink or taking payment for the use of the showers, I almost don't feel the time. It passes me by. I'm vaguely aware that I'm getting tired or silently counting the hours till I clock off, but it's low level, in the background. But whenever some problem Pete waddles up to me, I know that it's going to be endless hassle, and the pain in my head just erupts. I'm running a plate back to the cook, and I hadn't even bothered to remember what imagined failing this particular dish had. We both knew he'd just put it on a different plate, warm it up again, and then I'll bring it back to the table, and the customer will claim that it will be perfect this time, and they know what they like. Idiot. It feels like a long time before the clock is ticking over towards the final hour, almost time to be done with this nonsense for another day. There is a bit of lull. The clientele all seemed at least momentarily satisfied, and what I want to do is go to the back, sit down, and let the exhaustion wash over me. But I know from experience that this is not the play. As soon as I sit down, that'll be when I realize how tired I am. And I would bet my life sometimes there is a sensor in that chair that is connected directly to the bell on the front door. No sooner had my weary bones made contact in the past that the bell rang and I was summoned. Instead, I grab the mop and bucket and head for the restroom to give them a final clean before it becomes someone else's problem at shift change. Now, most people would assume that these would be an absolute hellhole, the sort of scene of destruction that would make anyone blush. That would shake even the most fervent person's belief in the deity of their choice. But this is not the case. I'm not sure why, but these guys always seem to treat the facilities with at least a bit of respect. They do their best not to leave it in a terrible condition, and for any of them that are properly caked in dirt, sweat or grease, they tend to hit the shower block before they even come over to us to get themselves fed and watered. Overall, it tends to be not the worst job of the day, at least most days. I knock on the door and swing it open. The first thing I see, the only thing, is a man standing naked at the sink, splashing water up to his face and body. He barely even looks up as I close the door immediately. My hand is still on the handle as I feel the normal reaction of embarrassment. I've just intruded on someone in a bit of a personal moment. Surely it's me that's at fault here. It doesn't take much longer than a second for that thought to get sandblasted out my mind. There are perfectly serviceable showers on site. Everyone knows that's where you can clean up. Yeah, you'll get the occasional person washing their face in the sink, but you don't strip off and stand naked to do that. No, it shouldn't be me that's feeling this way, it should be him. I let the mop bucket hit the deck and fling the door open again. It opens so hard that it bangs off the wall and rebounds, forcing me to catch it so that it doesn't slap me in the face. And I let him have it. I couldn't tell you to this day what I said, just that I wasn't polite about it. Pervert this and disgusting that, walking across the tile towards him, the whole time with my finger pointing and jabbing towards his pathetic form, telling him he should know better, there's no excuse, and probably hoping some woman has to come in here and catches him, calling him a sicko. All he does is stare at me blankly and slowly start to dress himself. The tiles underneath our feet are soaking wet. Somewhere in the middle of my tirade, he's finally putting the last of his soggy clothes on. Well, enough to cover up his shame, and squelches out. Not a word is said, not an apology or an explanation. He never looked angry, never looked scared. Not a jot of emotion ever crossed that face. The door closes behind him, and I'm left alone under the fluorescent lights to try and calm myself down. Once I've retrieved the mop and bucket, I kick them angrily around as I do my best to sop the water all over the place. The whole time I'm muttering to myself about some people and no respect. The water in the bucket is starting to turn red. For a brief moment I consider that he might have been injured. Maybe he was bleeding and just trying to clean himself up. What if I was the bad guy? That thought soon disappears. Even if that was the case, he should have hit the showers. I clean up the sink and dump the crimson cloth straight into the bin, wash my hands, and look at my furious face in the mirror and pray for home time. It may be a sign of how many strange characters we encounter out here that I barely think about the creep in the bathroom. When the other waitress comes in, I give her a heads up to keep an eye out, but my temper has calmed a little and we laugh about it, thinking about how pathetic a person he was. What was he hoping to achieve? She pointed out that being caught by a 24-year-old woman like me was probably exactly what he was after. That me giving him a lecture probably played right into his sick fantasies. At least, that was the last he was on my mind. Until a few weeks later. One of the regulars is chatting to me, asking me if they've heard about this guy they caught recently, calling him the truck stop killer. It's the talk of the place. Everyone is talking about his crimes, the lives he's taken, and what they'd have done to them if they caught him. I'm a little zoned out, and happily watching the crappy TV that hangs above the counter. It feels like I'm looking through it rather than at it. All that changes when an image flashes up. The face of the truck stop killer. My breath catches in my throat as I look up at these cold, dead eyes. He's the guy. It's him. The one I caught washing himself, the one who I lectured and shouted at. I had my finger inches from his face, screaming at him and calling him all sorts. That's when the bottom drops out of my stomach as I think back. The red on the floor and in the bucket. The liquid around. Maybe it was blood. I never considered that it might not have been his own. My head spins as I try not to imagine what could have happened and how close I had really come to ending up like one of his other victims. I shake my head hard to try and push these thoughts away. I try to forget about it, but it feels like I'm more tuned into the sound out in the darkness nowadays. I feel my chest tighten every time I crack open that restroom door, and if there's someone that I'm even slightly unsure of, I promise myself that I'll trust my gut from now on. My grandmother is a truly incredible woman. I know that most people think that about their grandparents, but she never ceases to amaze me. While most people of her age begin to slow down and take it a bit easy, you'd have a better time trying to stem the Niagara Falls with a kitchen chair than you would getting her to relax just a bit. She's always doing something. If there's even a glimmer of heat or sun in the sky, then she will be out in her garden tending to the plants and flowers. If the weather makes it impossible, then she'll be inside the house getting things straightened out that were already perfectly neat and tidy. The idea, anyway, is that I drop by a few times a week to check on her and make sure that there's nothing else she needs. The reality is that I go in and get food forced down my neck and listen to all the things she's been up to that put my social life to shame. Still, I think it's something we both enjoy. She likes to have someone to listen, and on the rare occasion she does need something she can't accomplish under her own steam. She'll begrudgingly come in the car with me to the store and apologize and complain the whole time about how she wishes she could still drive and hates how she needs help. To be honest, I'm not sure which of us is getting the most out of the arrangement, but it's definitely one that we both enjoy. I knock on the door as per usual and get ushered into the living room to be sat down in a chair and have a selection of sweet treats held under my nose until I take one. Her neighbor is sat in the opposite seat, and she's asking me a million questions about how school is going, am I seeing any nice young ladies, do I have a job, oh, do I enjoy that, what about this weather we're having? The two of them talk to, over, and about me at a machine gun rate. Honestly, most of the time I feel like it's me that comes to get my welfare checked. This pair are more competent, confident, and capable than I think I am ever going to be. Now that we're all settled with something to eat, I can see my grandmother look around as she almost sadly accepts that there's nothing more she needs to attend to urgently. She reluctantly settles in on the couch to the next door neighbor, and for the briefest moments a silence settles in and all is calm. Then the neighbor nudges with her elbow. Tell him about the guy." "Which guy?" The guy. She looks at me with a sigh and turns back. "The guy in the garden." "Ah." My grandma levers herself upright on the sofa. "So there was a guy in my garden yesterday." "Oh," I answer. "Was he a gardener?" "No." "Was he from the HOA or Social Security or something?" "No." I swallow whatever bit of pastry was still in my mouth. I have no idea how she does it, but every single baked good she forces on me is so delicious that you just know that it must be bad for you. So who was it then, I ask. We don't know, my grandma admits, but her neighbour is nearly vibrating with excitement to talk over her. But she did hit him with her rake. I pause, with the next bite halfway to my mouth. You did what? Hit him with a rake. Good solid smack as well it was. Grandma was trying and failing to look guilty. In fact, she looked pleased with herself. Grandma, you can't hit people just for being in your garden. Well, if he didn't want to be hit, then he shouldn't have climbed over my fence now. The two of them were sitting, nodding solemnly, as if I'm the one who doesn't understand the basic rules of society. Why was he even climbing over your fence? She shrugs as though that was the end of the conversation, just another random afternoon for her. Weed the garden, commit assault with a weapon against a stranger, back in for baked goods and TV soaps. I gradually managed to get the details out of her, amid many interruptions and additions from her friend, but I was left feeling like I was the one that was being too concerned, as if it was me that was the weird one, for not immediately moving to relatively serious assault when someone sets foot amongst my daffodils. Eventually, I take my leave with a pocket full of pastries and an assurance that I'll return in a day or two. And for a good few months, that was the last incident that involved elderly relatives and severe whippings administered with only household garden implements. Soon there was a more pressing matter on everyone's mind. There was a spat of vicious attacks taking place around the area. An unknown criminal, one who they were dubbing the Night Stalker. One that made everyone check over their shoulder every time the sun went down and double check all the locks were secured on their homes. Not Grandma, of course. She was as cool as a cucumber about the whole thing, accused me of worrying too much, and laughed at the idea of needing extra security. No matter how much I tried to get her to understand the severity of these attacks, she absolutely refused to pay it any mind, and there was nothing and no one that was going to make her feel unsafe in her home. And once again, I'm left feeling like the overly worried party here. The nervous Nelly that's blowing everything out of proportion and making a mountain out of a molehill. Not long after, I would be forced to face that she might have had a point. They finally captured the Night Stalker, took him into custody, held him behind bars, and there was a collective sigh of relief breathed by everyone in the state. Not Grandma, though. She had a far stranger opinion to offer on the entire affair. His face was plastered all over the papers, everywhere. You look up and you see those cold eyes staring back at you, flashing up on every news bulletin. He popped up on the TV as I was sitting in Grandma's living room one evening, and she glanced up, and then her eyes went back to her book. That young man that was in my garden that time, do you remember? Sure. I stop and snap my head up as I process what she said. Wait, what do you mean? Her book drops to her lap, and she gives a reluctant sigh and then looks across to me. I said, that's the man who climbed over my fence, the one who I whacked with the rake. Grandma, that's the Night Stalker, the guy that's been committing all these attacks around here. They finally arrested him. Yeah, I heard them saying. So, he's not the one who was in your garden? She had another good look at the TV. Oh, it's definitely him, all right. He was climbing over the fence and I just immediately started whacking him, beating him like a dog. Now I wish I'd done it a few more times. She went back to her reading. Not a care in the world. Just casually battered one of the most violent and depraved criminals in recent memory. To most people, it would have been a claim to fame, or at least a time to sit back and reflect on how close they came to harm. Maybe even to reassess their security arrangements. To look into getting a bit more safety around them. Not my grandma, just another day for her. She truly is a remarkable woman. There is little more peaceful in the world than the open road in front of you, your music on the stereo, and somewhere to be but nowhere to get too fast. It's somewhere up in the back roads of Sonoma County, and I'm driving along, the wheels under the car eating up the miles and taking us slowly and surely to where we need to be. In the back seat, my son has laid down across the seat to get some sleep. Is it safe? No. Am I going to stop and wake him up and make him sit up? Also no. It hardly feels like there's any point in stopping just to cause us both hassle. Besides, it's hard to remember the last time we even passed another car. The gathering dusk is creeping its way around us. The memories of the day's sunlight begin gradually dampening and are held down as the darkness begins to appear. It happens so gradually that you barely even notice it. It's only if you're looking out for it that you'll see the golden moment of transition. That brief spell where the day gives way to night, as though they're both in agreement. Old friends exchanging roles and swapping shifts. One melds into the other with effortless subtlety and smoothness. The car beneath me is eating up the road. Every passing minute is a little closer to where we need to go. My fingers drum on the wheel. Progress and peace. All you need to be happy. As the dark draws in and the light keeps disappearing, we are still making progress. In my rear view, the constant stream of dust and the endless hills are broken by the first headlights that I've seen in a long time. Still far back, but proof, if nothing else, that someone else is out here suffering this endless nothingness to get to where they need to be. It takes a little more than a few corners and a few climbs and dips before they're closing the distance. Not a problem in these sorts of roads. There's more than enough chances to pass. There's no ego here. We're far enough from the concrete jungle and asphalt of the city to care very little about personal offense when it comes to faster driving. It isn't long before the headlights are coming up behind me. I can see it's a truck. No doubt we'll hit the next straight and he'll leave me in the dust. Well, more dust in this case. Just someone with a financial incentive to get wherever they're going. And me, nothing more than a conservatively driving inconvenience. Sure enough, we make it to the brow of the next hill, and the road opens up in front of us. Nothing for as far as the eye can see. The perfect opportunity to pass. The lights in my rear view flash, then flash again. Go, just go, you could get a tank through there. I ease off the gas to make it obvious. I'm not here for a race. I'm not going to care. Just go past, get where you're going, I'll be right behind you doing the same. But instead the lights keep flashing, and now I'm thinking. My hand is on the dial, turning the music down so low there's nothing more than a series of key notes and the occasional rhythm. I listen to the sound of the road beneath my wheels, and everything seems fine. When I move the wheels from side to side, the car responds exactly as I expect. I tap the brakes and see two sets of red reflected in the grille behind me. There's nothing wrong with my vehicle. There can't be, nothing obvious anyway. I burn off a little more speed, make it blatant that I don't want to race, I want them to pass. I stick my hand out the window and wave them on. How much more obvious can I be? When these lights flash again, I'm now a bit worried. What if there is something wrong with the car? What if there's something dangerous that I just can't hear or feel? I indicate towards the side of the road and slow down to stop, and the truck behind me does the same. No point in waking up the little one in the back if I don't have to. They seem to stir a little, but they don't do anything more than that. The car grinds to a halt, kicking up dust as I slow to a stop. Not worth turning the engine off at this point. Might as well keep the music going and let the little one have a chance to sleep. In the rear view, I can see the truck pulling into the side behind me. More than ever before, I am very aware of just how remote we are, how far away from everyone else. And aside from the truck, I haven't seen anyone in as long as I can remember. I take a deep breath and convince myself that this is nothing more than a good Samaritan. Someone who is looking out for a woman on her own driving through the wilderness and willing to help. The door opens under my hand, and I close it as gently as I can. I have one eye on my tires as I'm looking closely and a second on the cab behind me. It's impossible to make out much of who the driver is or how they look. The gathering dusk makes it even harder to see. A quick glance to both sides makes it certain that what I thought was already still true. We are entirely alone. There doesn't even seem to be a memory of traffic anywhere around. Rolling hills and endless barren wasteland as far as the eye can see. The front two tires look good to my eye, a little dirtier than when we set out, but nothing more egregious than that. The door of the truck pops open and I pause halfway to check out the rear of my own car. A man emerges, dropping down easily onto the ground below. He's wearing dark glasses, a cap pulled down low and a checkered shirt. If you ask me to draw the stereotypical trucker, I would have drawn this guy. He doesn't seem in a hurry to close the distance between us, so I decide to quickly check the rest of the wheels myself. As I get to the rear of the vehicle, neither of the back two wheels look out of the ordinary to me. With how urgent the signal seemed from the driver behind me, I expected to be riding on the rims here. Don't get me wrong, I don't have much in the way of mechanical knowledge, but to me there doesn't seem to be anything very wrong. The driver of the truck is coming towards me now. Even from my kneeling position down by the rear axle, I can hear him approaching. When I look up, he is silhouetted against the darkness. I still can't make out any distinguishing features on him. In his right hand he's carrying a tire iron. There is something about his demeanor and his approach that makes me feel a little wary. The air is still warm from the day, but I feel as though there are icy fingers running down my spine. Glancing back at the car, it's clear to my eyes anyway that nothing is amiss. The only thing that feels wrong is the fact that I've pulled over here in the middle of nowhere and this guy is now bearing down on me. Despite that fact, he's still not done nor said anything, and I can feel every muscle in my body tense up and an adrenaline dump flushing through my system. My mind is telling my body to be ready for action, whatever that action might be, at the slightest hint of trouble. He's only a few steps away now, and I get a good look at his face for the first time. It's lined and weather-worn, with some wispy facial hair, but the thing that stands out are the eyes. They're a deep brown, and they feel like pools of indifference. It's as though there's nothing behind them, no warmth nor compassion, nor anger or rage, just nothingness. I can see him look straight through me, and I feel myself shiver. My fists clench into balls at my side, and I'm preparing to react. Suddenly he goes to look through me, to look past me, and he stops. I can see hesitation flash over his face. My mind is screaming at me not to, but I turn my head and look back over my shoulder, and I can see a tiny face pressed up against the back windshield. Quickly, I look back to the trucker who's frozen in place, looking from me to the car to the child. Those dead eyes never change, but I can tell what he's thinking. When he finally does speak, he mumbles, in an uninterested, monotone voice, "Thought you had a flat." He pointed towards the car with the tire iron and I flinch. He notices. "Doesn't look like you guys do. You get home safe now." His eyes linger on me for just a moment too long, and flicks back to the car a few times to make sure there really was someone else in the car, before he turns back and walks slowly to the truck. He pulls himself up to the cab, and that massive diesel roars into action, spewing black exhaust fumes. He doesn't even give me a final glance as he peels out and heads off past us in a cloud of stink and dust. I let out a breath that I hadn't even realized I was holding, and I go back to the car. Somehow my hands are shaking. Nothing has happened, but I can't shake the feeling that something nearly did. I'm trying to tell myself that I'm just being paranoid. That's all I've got on my mind. Once I have the little one buckled back in, sitting up this time, I take a second, sat behind the wheel, to make sure that the telltale clouds of dust had disappeared from view before I switch the engine on and turn the radio back on. It'll be dark soon, and I want to get to where we're going. The darkness is closing in fast, and the last thing I want is to be out on this road in the middle of the night. With a deep breath, and what I hope is a reassuring smile to my sleepy passenger, I ease the car back into the road and count down the distance to the nearest town. The next morning, everything feels a lot better. It always does in the light of day. I'm almost at the point where I'm laughing at myself for being so suspicious. That guy in the truck was probably a good Samaritan, just a decent person who legitimately thought I needed help. I've almost convinced myself of the fact, until I open the paper and see these same dead eyes staring back at me. It's a drawing, an artist's sketch, and the rest of it might or might not be him, but there's no mistaking the eyes. I feel myself flinch, and every word of the article makes my blood run cold. Citizens to be aware. Highly dangerous, do not approach. Suspected in the killings of 2 women. My blood turns to ice in my veins. Pulls them over under the pretense of assisting with vehicular faults. My mind races, imagining all sorts of unimaginable horrors. What could have been? What might have happened? What if the kid hadn't popped their head up at just that moment? A strange sort of monster who would have been willing to kill me until he found out I wasn't alone. The sun is shining, and the warmth of the day is seeping through everything, but I feel myself shiver again. No more night drives. Not ever again. Another day coming to an end, and the raindrops that are hurtling out of the endless blackness above seem appropriate. Nothing to show for it, no progress made. I must have walked half a marathon on these streets today alone. New York might be the city that never sleeps, but the city can do whatever it likes. I personally need some shut-eye. Inside my pocket I know there isn't much, just cash. I know it because I've counted it nearly constantly, ever aware of just how low my funds are getting. I need something, and I need it fast. The hotel in front of me looks like something out of a nightmare, a rough, brutish building with clientele to match, but the price range reflects it. With my current financial situation, the options are limited and becoming less by the day. All I need is 4 walls and a bed. The rain that has been deluging down on the city seems to have suddenly found an extra gear, and with that final, demoralizing realization that I'm now soaked to the skin, it seems like the decision has been made for me. I nip under the awning and stand for a moment, out of the wet, listening to the droplets smash into the flimsy metal above me. The people still out there are trudging through the puddles, collars and umbrellas up, eyes straight ahead. No one speaks. One of the lights has busted on the sign, and no one has taken the time or effort to repair it, but the exhaustion in my bones is screaming louder than the urge to find anywhere else. There's a ratty bed somewhere up the side of the hotel that has my name written all over it. Even if it's the grottiest place in the entirety of New York, I'm gonna have my head down there. The man at the desk looks at me suspiciously when I say I want a room for the night. Must be unusual for customers to book the rooms here on anything other than an hourly basis. Once he's satisfied himself that I'm not a cop, he starts rummaging around underneath the desk for a key. To call this a lobby would be an insult. Yellowing wallpaper that must have soaked up decades of cigarette smoke, beautifully lit by the few functioning light bulbs that must be the dimmest money could buy. The whole place is in dire need of a paint lick, or a full demolition. It's hard to say which one would improve it most. He slides the key across the counter, and I place the money beside it. Nothing to most people, but parting with it makes me even more aware of just how low my funds are getting. I don't even realize that I'm holding the money down with a finger until he wrenches it out from under me and gives me another suspicious look. Might have been better to be thought of as a cop. Now he just thinks I'm some sort of weirdo. I think better of asking him if they have a continental breakfast, and would he recommend the lobster thermidor? There's equal odds that he'd tell me there isn't a kitchen, and if we don't know, we'll fly across the counter and go for me. Looking down at the key in my hand, I leave him to it, and head off into the bowels of the building, dripping water over a carpet that's probably grateful for the first bit of cleaning it's getting since God knows when. Room 341. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be on the 3rd floor? After all, who in their right mind wouldn't want to spend even more time than was needed getting to their room? More time to take in the sights and appreciate the grandeur all around me, I suppose. There's an elevator on the back wall at the end of the corridor, and I make my way towards it. What are the chances that it works? Slim to none is my best guess, but anything that can get me to bed quicker is worth taking. It doesn't take me that long to reach it, and it looks like it might be sort of functional. It dinged and battered. It certainly fit into the surroundings. I try not to think about the hundreds and thousands of sweaty hands that have touched the call button as it lights up under my finger, taking in everything around me. There doesn't seem to be a single redeeming quality about the place. The light above me flickers, and the button illumination fades a little before sparking back to life. Still silent from behind the doors, with no sounds of machinery creaking or ancient pulleys straining. There's heavy footsteps from the stairwell to my left. Either someone has gotten tired of waiting, or they've decided to get some exercise in for the day. This isn't my first rodeo. I know how it goes in places like this. Minimal eye contact, don't acknowledge each other. Everyone has their own reason for visiting, and very few of them are the sort of thing you'd want to broadcast. Against my better judgment, I glance at the man coming down the stairs. He's taking his time, every step slow and steady, probably because of the plastic bag he's holding. There's one in each hand, and they look heavy. He looks around and catches my eye. I think it's busted. My shock at being spoken to makes me forget what I'm waiting for. He smiles and nods towards the elevator door with his head. Busted. Don't think it's working. You'll be waiting there a long time. His friendliness was somehow even more unnerving than being ignored. There's a general air of hostility and subterfuge about the place that makes any normal interaction jarring. I look him over with suspicion. Curly brown hair and a moustache, average height. Could be that I've walked past 100 other just like him today and not even noticed. Oh, thanks. I finally managed to find some words. He stood near me now, not doing anything in particular. It almost feels like he's waiting for a response, so I scramble a bit to get something out. I appreciate the heads up. Shaking myself off, I brace myself for the long climb up the stairs. They somehow look even more perilous than the rest of the place. The sort of construction that they replace and repair every time it breaks, and not a second sooner. In amongst the other stains on the floor, there's a new trail of something dark that it's weaved its way down the center of the stair tread, and leads along the floor to my new friend. I think he might be leaking, I tell him. He looks at his arms and down at his torso in confusion, and then he hefts one of the bags a little in his hand and notices a few drips coming out the bottom. Good catch. I'll go sort this out. It's already been more interaction than most would want. I'm too tired, too wet, and too miserable to continue the conversation any longer. Instead, I just raise a hand in what I hope he'll understand as a signal of either gratitude or farewell, and I start climbing, putting one foot after the other and feeling my sodden sock in my wet shoe with every step. Looking back, he's standing at the stairwell watching me go. He shoots me another smile, and I quickly turn around. One final glance before I turn the corner. He's now looking at the drops coming out of the bag with a look that seems halfway between curiosity and amusement. He shakes them a little, and more escapes, hitting the floor. Whatever, his business, not mine. These stairs seem to go on forever. Upwards. The stale stench of the place is getting worse the higher I climb, and after an eternity, I emerge on the 3rd floor and see my room dead ahead. One nondescript door in the sea of others. The key fits, the lock turns, and I make my way in. I dump my stuff and start to get rid of my wet clothes, the rain hammering on the windows, obscuring what would be an otherwise glorious view of brick wall. It's hard not to try and guess how long it's been since the bedclothes were changed, so I try not to think about it and flop down on my back. The room looks almost decent when I close my eyes. The noise from the other rooms and the streets outside filter through the thin walls, but you get used to the background sounds, and after a few minutes it's starting to become less noticeable. My eyes are tight shut, and my plans are swirling slowly. Something will come up tomorrow. This will be my last night staying somewhere like this. I'm on the very brink of sleep, in that limbo where consciousness is in flux and everything just feels good. When the fire bell starts to ring, the most I'm going to do is open my eyes, and I stare at the ceiling with the sound hammering away, incessant, urgent, even painful in my tired state. A minute goes by, 2. It's still going. It has to be a false alarm. It always is. I can feel my frustration rising. The constant alarm is like a pick, stabbing in my ears and through my brain. It's more than I can take. I pull on dry clothes from my bag, wrap the wet stuff up in a hotel towel, and stuff the whole lot inside my bag. When I go to unlock the door, it's clear the lock didn't function in the first place. That seals it. Into the corridor where there's a smell of smoke, but nothing crazy. Before hitting the stairs, I can see the elevator door is wedged open with a fire extinguisher, so that's why it wouldn't be coming for me. I pull it clear, let the doors close, and head down the stairs. There's a 0 chance I'm getting in a death trap elevator during a fire just out of spite. When I hit the lobby, there aren't as many people as you'd expect. Whether the place was fairly empty or most have just decided to stay in their rooms and wait for the alarm to go off, it's hard to say, and it's even harder to care. I step around the newly laid trail that the man from the stairwell seemed to have left. It runs straight through the lobby and out the door into the rain. Clearly he didn't even bother to check out. Approaching the desk, the clerk has the same look of open hostility, but I can feel that I must be wearing one to match. All I have to say is, I want a refund. He gives me my money back, no excuses and no questions. I dump the key on the desk, turn my collar up, and head back out into the downpour to find somewhere slightly less terrible to rest my head. There must be at least one place in this city where a clean bed and a working elevator are worth the price of admission, and there would be no reason for me to think of that hotel ever again. Until there was. It isn't the picture in the article that caught my eye a few months later. It was a headline. Someone had been killing and dismembering women. A real sicko, and they decide to call him the Torso Killer. In the article, they're calling him the Times Square Ripper. Why they insist on giving these freaks nicknames is beyond me. But once I look at the story properly, I know that the face looks familiar. There's something in the eyes that gnaw at me. I've seen this man before. And just like that in my mind, I'm back in the hotel. I'm standing, waiting, cursing whatever caused the broken elevator in what had to be the shoddiest hotel in Times Square. I can feel the drip of water falling over my overcoat, and I can smell the smoke. Except now, with a bit of time, was it really from cigarettes? Had an actual fire already been set? The man in the newspaper is looking at the camera for his mugshot, his eyes vacant. He looks almost bored. Back in the hotel, the same man comes down the stairs with these bags in his hand. That trail of liquid dripping behind him. He looked livelier than he does now on the page. What I thought was friendliness and enthusiasm might just be excitement. It never crossed my end to check if there had actually been a fire that night. By the time they turned up to tackle it, I was long gone, dripping water on the carpet of an only slightly more reputable hotel lobby. In boring black on white, the paper tells me that he had set fire to his room before leaving, a fire that he started to try and get rid of the evidence of his crimes. I take in the details and my blood runs cold. 2 women, both of them left lying on a bed, dead, neither of them close to being intact. My throat feels narrow as I try to swallow. The bags, the liquids. He's being called the torso killer because he likes to remove their heads and their hands. My own hands gently rub at my throat, almost to make sure it's still there. I don't like to think on it too much, but there's a fairly good chance I know what he was carrying in his hands that day. Every chance he wedged the door open on a floor upstairs to make sure the fire caught. God knows what would have happened if I'd have confronted him. Impossible to put myself in the mindset of a person like that, but the last thing I'd be doing with a bag of heads and hands is giving people advice on broken elevators. Was he trying to enjoy the moment a little more? Was he reveling in the fact I knew nothing about what he'd just finished doing? Was he sizing me up? It's raining again as I fold the newspaper up and tuck it inside my coat. My collar is turned up as I step out into the rain, and I find myself looking at the faces that pass by. If someone like that can seem so calm and unhurried, knowing the carnage he just left a few floors above, I feel myself shiver. But I know I'm not cold. I'm walking the streets again, but everyone feels a lot more suspicious to me all of a sudden. In my mind, I allocate just a little extra of my cash to put towards hotels. Much better to burn a hole in my wallet than dodge a bullet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. It really means a lot. I know this video was a bit different to the kind of stories we usually narrate, but I wanted to do something a little bit different and see your opinions of it. If it's something that you guys liked, please be sure to let me know, and I can maybe do it again in future. A huge thank you to my members and patrons because their donations this month actually helped me make this video, because I had to hire someone to actually investigate, get these people's testimonies and then write it out. So there we have it. Alright then, well thank you so much again for watching. If you want to see more content, links on screen now, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.